Please leave a comment where you are watching from. It had been a while since I let someone over. Not just for a date, but into my space, my apartment, my quiet, guarded life. After a string of awkward or outright awful experiences, I'd taken a long break from dating. But like most things, loneliness has a way of creeping back in when you least expect it. That's how I ended up matching with Luca. His profile was clean and understated. No shirtless photos, no lists of demands. Just a few pictures, him at a record store, standing in front of a bookstore, one where he was holding a bowl of ramen. His bio read, "If you like horror movies, late-night walks, and overthinking everything, we'll probably get along." That last line got me. We talked for about 10 days before meeting. It was easy the way we texted. He was clever, but not performative. He didn't ask for selfies or make weird comments. Our conversations drifted from music to philosophy to childhood memories. He told me his favorite movie was The Thing, which immediately scored points. I told him mine was Rosemary's Baby, and he said, "That's a slow burn but brutal." I like it. We decided to meet for a movie on a Thursday night. I picked the film, an indie horror flick playing at a tiny old theater downtown with sticky floors and seats that creaked like bones. He met me outside, right on time. He looked just like his photos, tall, slightly disheveled, wearing a worn hoodie and jeans. His voice was soft, almost too soft for the street noise, but he smiled when he saw me and said, "You're real." "You too," I replied. The movie was decent, creepy, atmospheric, not particularly gory. He didn't try to hold my hand or make any moves during the film, which I appreciated. Afterward, we walked a few blocks under the dim glow of streetlights, talking about the ending, the cinematography, the score. When we reached my apartment, I hesitated at the front door. He noticed. "If you're not comfortable, it's okay," he said. "No pressure." I looked at him, earnest, calm, a touch of melancholy in his expression, and made a choice I wouldn't usually make. "No, it's fine," I said. "You can come in. Just for a bit." He followed me up the stairs, quiet and polite. I lived alone in a second-floor unit of a converted duplex. One bedroom, small kitchen, creaky wood floors. I flipped on the living room lamp and motioned for him to sit on the couch. "Make yourself at home," I said. "Want anything? Water? Tea?" "Water's good," he replied. I brought him a glass and sat across from him. We kept talking, about everything and nothing. He asked about the books on my shelf, and I told him which ones I'd actually read. He noticed the tarot deck on my table and asked if I ever used it. "Sometimes," I said. "Mostly when I'm feeling indecisive." He smiled. "I like that." Around midnight, I asked if he was hungry. He nodded. I could eat. I made us sandwiches, nothing fancy, just turkey and cheese with mustard, and we ate while sitting on the floor, backs against the couch. It felt comfortable. Familiar, even though we barely knew each other. After we finished, he looked at me and said, "Mind if I crash here? Just for a few hours. I've got a long drive back." He lived about 40 minutes away, and it was late. I considered it for a moment, then nodded. "Okay. Couch only, though." "Of course," he said immediately. "I won't overstep." I gave him a pillow and a blanket, turned off the lights, and went to bed. That should have been the end of it. But I woke up around 1:08 a.m., heart thudding. At first, I wasn't sure what had stirred me. The apartment was dim, the only light coming from the street lamp filtering through the blinds. I sat up and listened. Silence. Then a faint sound. A shuffle, like something brushing against the hallway wall. I slipped out of bed and walked slowly to the door, opening it just a crack. The living room was empty. The blanket and pillow were on the couch, undisturbed. But Luca was gone. I stepped out, calling softly, "Luca?" No answer. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, light off. I nudged it open. Empty. The front door unlocked. Not wide open, but not fully closed either. Just hanging slightly ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry. I felt a chill run through me. I walked to the door, closed it, and locked both the knob and the deadbolt. My hands were shaking. Maybe he left. Maybe he had an emergency. Maybe he didn't want to wake me. But why leave the door open? I turned around to head back to my room, and froze. There was a sound outside the window. Faint, but unmistakable. Footsteps. Slow. Uneven. Shuffling across the gravel path behind the building. I moved toward the window and peeked through the blinds. Nothing. But then I heard it again, closer now. Like someone dragging their feet. I backed away from the window and grabbed my phone. No new messages. No missed calls. No sign from Luca. I texted him. "Where did you go?" No response. I waited, listened. The footsteps faded. Eventually, I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. I lay awake until dawn, clutching my phone, ears straining for any sound. By 6 a.m., I gave up and got dressed. I made coffee, checked the locks again, and sat by the front window waiting for, I don't know what, an explanation, an apology, a knock. Nothing came. At 8:12 a.m., I finally got a text. "Hey, sorry I left. Got called to help a friend. Didn't want to wake you." I stared at the message for a long time. "You left the door open," I replied. "And you didn't say goodbye." No answer. I opened the app we matched on. His profile was gone. Deleted. I searched his name on every platform I could think of. Nothing. It was like he disappeared. I never heard from him again after that. Online dating had never really been my thing. I was 25, living in Burlington, Vermont, and up until that point, most of my relationships had been through mutual friends, college parties, or just the old-fashioned way, meeting someone at a bookstore or coffee shop. But after a particularly rough breakup the year before, I decided to take a break from dating entirely. That break lasted 4 months. Eventually, the loneliness crept in. My friends were getting engaged, moving in with their partners, or planning weddings. I started to feel like the odd one out. So after some half-hearted encouragement from a coworker, I gave in and made an account on a dating site called TrueSpark. It was marketed as a more serious dating platform, with lengthy profiles and filtered matches. I figured if I was going to try online dating, I might as well go for the version that didn't involve endless swiping. The sign-up process was long. I answered dozens of personality questions, wrote a bio, listed my hobbies, and described my ideal partner. There was even a prompt asking you to describe your emotional availability on a scale of 1 to 10. I hesitated and put 6. I chose not to upload a profile photo. I liked the idea of being matched based on compatibility first, not appearance. I was told that if I didn't post a photo, I would only be shown to other users who also opted out of sharing pictures. That was fine by me. I wasn't looking for eye candy. I just wanted something real. The first 2 weeks were rough. I received over a dozen match suggestions, and most of them were odd. One guy wrote that he only dated women who never wore makeup. Another said he lived with his mom and collected taxidermy. One profile was just a list of conspiracy theories and things the government won't tell you. I was about to delete my account when I got matched with someone named Logan. His profile stood out immediately. He was 28, lived in Montpelier, and described himself as a curious soul who loves jazz music, red wine, and long conversations that stretch into the early morning. He had also uploaded a photo, which was unusual since I hadn't posted one. I didn't know how that worked, but his profile seemed too good to ignore. Logan's photo showed a man with short dark hair, a clean-shaven face, and a relaxed smile. He wore a navy peacoat and stood in front of a brick building, probably a cafe or bookstore. He looked kind and intelligent. I was intrigued. We messaged back and forth for a few days. His writing style was thoughtful, and he asked questions about things beyond surface level. We talked about our favorite books, what we were like in high school, and whether we believed in soulmates. It was refreshing. By the 4th day, he suggested we meet in person. He proposed a wine bar in downtown Burlington, 8 p.m. on a Thursday night. I agreed. Since he didn't know what I looked like, I told him I'd be carrying something red, a small handbag I had, and he said he'd wear a red necktie. It felt like a cute, old-school way to identify each other, like something out of a movie. I arrived at the bar around 7:45 p.m. It was a cozy, dimly lit spot with brick walls, flickering candles on the tables, and soft jazz playing in the background. I ordered a glass of red wine and found a small table near the back corner, my red bag resting on my lap. As I waited, a few men approached me. One tried to chat me up and offered to buy me a drink. I politely declined and kept glancing at the door, looking for someone in a red tie. But no one came. By 8:30, I had finished my wine and was beginning to feel embarrassed and frustrated. I texted Logan, but there was no response. I waited another 15 minutes and then decided to leave. I walked out onto the sidewalk, my heels clicking against the pavement. The side streets were quiet, and I headed toward my car, which I'd parked a few blocks away. As I turned the corner into a narrow side street, a car drove slowly past me and parked directly behind mine. At first, I didn't think much of it, but when I reached my car and pulled out my keys, the other car's door opened. A man stepped out. He was taller than I expected, probably 6 feet, and wore a wrinkled dress shirt, slacks, and a red tie. My stomach dropped. "You must be Susie," he said, his voice gravelly. "Sorry I'm late. I'm Logan." I froze. He looked nothing like the photo. His hair was long, greasy, and blonde. His face was deeply lined, and he looked to be in his late 40s, maybe even early 50s. His shirt was stained, and his hands were trembling slightly. "I was waiting for you," I said quietly, trying to stay calm. "You never showed." "Got held up," he said casually. "But I figured we could still hang out. Better late than never, right?" I took a step back, trying to keep distance between us. I was just heading home. He took a step toward me. "I came all the way here," he said. "Let's not waste the night. Come on, I'll drive." He gestured toward his car. That's when I saw it. In his right hand, partially hidden under his coat, was a small knife. My heart raced. My mind scrambled for a plan. As he spoke, I slowly reached into my red handbag. My fingers wrapped around the small canister of pepper spray I always carried. I never thought I'd need it, but my dad had insisted on it when I moved out. "I want you to get in the car now," he said, his voice lower. I didn't answer. I stepped to the left, just enough to give myself space. Then I pulled out the pepper spray and aimed it straight at his face. The hiss of the spray was sharp and sudden. Logan screamed, dropping the knife and clutching his eyes. Blinded, he stumbled backward, cursing and flailing. I didn't wait. I turned and ran, sprinting down the street toward the main road. I screamed for help as loud as I could. Within seconds, a man in a security uniform came running from the direction of the wine bar. "What happened?" he asked. I pointed behind me, gasping for breath. "There's a man. He tried to kidnap me. He had a knife." The security guard grabbed his phone and called the police. Moments later, blue and red lights lit up the street. Logan was still on the ground, groaning, eyes swollen shut. The officers handcuffed him and retrieved the knife. I gave a full statement at the police station that night. They asked if I wanted to press charges. I said yes. They told me the man's real name was not Logan. He had a criminal record spanning several states, mostly for fraud and harassment, but also for attempting to impersonate others online. The photo on his dating profile wasn't him. It was stolen from someone else's social media. I went home that night shaken, but incredibly grateful. It took weeks before I felt comfortable going out alone again. I deleted my profile on TrueSpark and never used that site again. I also stopped talking to the coworker who initially convinced me to try it. She was the one who had matched with Logan first, but passed his information along to me after she lost interest. She claimed she didn't know anything was off, but I couldn't bring myself to trust her after that. I didn't date anyone for a long time after. The experience had rattled me deeply. I had always assumed I was cautious, smart about who I met. But this man had slipped through the cracks, and I had almost paid a terrible price for it. Now, years later, I still carry that pepper spray. I still park close to entrances and avoid side streets at night. Some people might call it paranoia. I call it survival. Definitely growing tired of them. After dozens of awkward conversations and a few forgettable meetups, I had developed a kind of second sense for when something felt off. Still, I was willing to give people the benefit of the doubt, at least until they gave me a concrete reason not to. This story takes place in the summer of 2018 in Charleston, South Carolina. I had recently moved there to start a new job as a junior editor at a small publishing firm. It was hot, humid, and buzzing with tourists, and I was trying to settle into my new routine. Between unpacking boxes and learning the bus routes, I downloaded an app called Pulse, a dating app popular in the Southeast. It had a friendlier interface than most, and I figured it wouldn't hurt to try. That's where I matched with a guy named Tyler. Tyler's profile didn't scream anything alarming. He looked like an average guy in his late 20s, messy brown hair, a shy smile, and a few photos with a German shepherd. His bio said he liked ska music, hiking, and deep conversations over cheap pizza. We messaged for a few days, and he seemed normal. Not particularly witty or charismatic, but polite and responsive. He mentioned that he lived in Mount Pleasant, just outside the city, and didn't drive much because of a suspended license. That should have been a red flag, but I let it slide. He asked me to meet him halfway at a pizza place called Tony's Slice House. I agreed. It was about a 30-minute walk for me, and I figured it would be an easy public first date. But on the day we were supposed to meet, he texted me saying it was too far for him to walk to the restaurant and asked if I could come closer to his neighborhood instead. I hesitated. I didn't love the idea of changing the plan last minute, especially when it was clearly his issue, not mine. But I didn't want to be inflexible. I agreed, and we settled on meeting at a small park near his place. When I arrived, I saw him leaning against a bench, scrolling on his phone. Right away, I noticed several things. First, he looked nothing like his photos. Not in a he aged a little kind of way, but in a these pictures must be at least 5 years old kind of way. His hair was greasy, slicked back unevenly, and his face was more sunken than I remembered. His shirt had holes around the collar and sleeves. He wore sandals with no socks, and his toenails were noticeable. Still, I approached him, gave a quick side hug, and tried to push past my initial discomfort. I suggested we sit down and talk, maybe go for a walk through the park. He shook his head. "We're not getting pizza," he said. "Let's just chill here." It wasn't exactly romantic, but I nodded. We found a bench near the lake and sat down. He immediately started talking about a weed strain he had just picked up and how he'd smoked earlier that day. I noticed his teeth were stained dark brown around the gums, likely from tobacco or chewing dip, and the smell of smoke clung to his clothes. Trying to steer the conversation towards something more neutral, I asked about his dog. He barely responded, then pulled out his phone and started texting someone. I sat there awkwardly, watching ducks glide across the water, while he said nothing for a full minute. Then out of nowhere, he put his phone down, turned to me and said, "You're cute. You're like, really cute. I like innocent girls." I gave him a polite smile and said thank you, unsure how to respond. He leaned in suddenly and whispered, "You're such a good baby girl." Before I could process what he'd just said, he grabbed my face with one hand, leaned closer, and licked me. Like actually licked my face, from the bottom of my chin to the top of my cheekbone. I froze. "Did you just lick me?" I asked, pulling away and wiping my cheek with my sleeve. He grinned like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Yeah, you smell good." I stared at him, stunned. "Don't do that again." He shrugged and laughed. "You're funny." I was done. I stood up and pretended to check my phone. "Actually, I just got a message from my roommate. She needs me back at the apartment ASAP. Sorry, I've got to go." He looked disappointed. "What? Already? We just got here." "Yeah," I said firmly. "Emergency." He stood up too, walking beside me as I headed toward the exit. "Come back to my place. We can smoke a bowl, chill out. I've got a couch and everything." "I'm good," I said quickly. "Don't be like that," he replied. "Just one bowl. You'll like it." I stopped walking, turned to face him and said, "I said no. Please don't follow me." He held up his hands. All right. Chill." I walked away without looking back. My pace quickened as I turned onto the main road, and I didn't slow down until I was several blocks away. I didn't even wait to get home to block his number and report his profile. The app had a feature where you could flag inappropriate behavior, and I used it without hesitation. Later that night, I told my roommate about what happened, and she sat in stunned silence for a full minute before saying, "He licked you? Like with his tongue?" "Yep," I said. "Like a dog." After that, I stopped using dating apps for a while. The whole experience had shaken me, not just because of the lick, but because I'd ignored so many signs along the way. The last-minute change, the outdated photos, the visible signs of neglect. I had allowed politeness to override my instincts. It made me think about how often women are conditioned to be agreeable, to give people chances, to not overreact. But if I had trusted my gut from the beginning, I could have saved myself from that entire encounter. Months later, I saw Tyler again. I was walking through a farmer's market downtown with a friend, and there he was, sitting on a bench near the entrance, smoking and scrolling on his phone. He looked up and saw me. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then he smiled. I didn't smile back. I just turned and walked the other way. It was the spring of 2011, and I had just started a new job at a manufacturing plant in Kenosha, Wisconsin. The work was tough and the hours were long, 3 p.m. to nearly midnight most days, but it paid well, and I was trying to save up to move out of my parents' place. I didn't have much of a social life at the time. Most of my friends had either moved away or were busy settling into their careers or getting married. I was stuck somewhere in between, not sure what I wanted, but knowing I didn't want to be alone. After weeks of pestering from a coworker, I finally downloaded a dating app called Flame. It was a local app, mostly popular in the Midwest. I wasn't expecting much, but I figured it couldn't hurt to put myself out there. I made a profile, Just a few pictures from high school and a short bio about liking classic rock and fishing. Within a few days, I started chatting with a girl named Haley. Haley was gorgeous. Not in the obvious Instagram influencer kind of way, but in a natural, earthy sense. She had dark brown curls that fell past her shoulders, a dimpled smile, and a way of typing that felt warm and personal. We exchanged messages daily about music, life, food, and our mutual dislike of corporate America. She was 23, just a year older than me, and worked part-time at a bookstore while finishing her degree in psychology. Our chats were lighthearted at first, but they gradually became more thoughtful. She told me about her love for late-night walks and how she often sat by Lake Michigan to clear her head. I admitted I hadn't done anything spontaneous in a while. After a couple of weeks of texting, we decided to meet. Since I worked late, we agreed to hang out after my shift on a Friday night. Haley was okay with it being late. She said she liked quiet places, and the park at night would be our little secret spot. I was nervous but excited. I hadn't been on a real date in over a year, and this one felt different. There was something familiar about her, something I couldn't quite place. Her last name rang a faint bell, and I wondered if we had mutual friends or had crossed paths in high school. We agreed to meet at Tyler Park by the lake. It was a quiet, open space with a few benches, a small dock, and a walking trail that curved around the shoreline. I got off work at 9:45 p.m., went home to shower and change, and drove to the park. I arrived at around 10:40 p.m. Haley was already there, sitting on a bench near the water, dressed in a denim jacket and leggings, her hair down and catching the breeze. She stood and smiled when she saw me. "Hey, you made it," she said, her voice even softer in person. "Yeah," I replied, grinning. "Wasn't gonna miss this." We sat down and talked for a while. The moonlight shimmered on the lake, and the scent of wet grass filled the air. We lit a joint she had brought and passed it between us, laughing quietly at our own stories. She told me about her classes, her weird regulars at the bookstore, and how she sometimes wrote poetry but never shared it. I told her about work, how I hated the night shift, and how I once got caught sleeping in the break room. As the high settled in, I leaned back, staring at the stars. Everything felt peaceful, surreal even. Then out of nowhere, Haley leaned forward, grabbed her stomach, and made a strange noise, a gurgled hiccup that turned into a retch. She leaned over and vomited violently onto the grass beside the bench. I sat up straight, shocked. "Whoa, are you okay?" She gagged again, another wave of vomit splashing onto the ground. I froze for a second, then awkwardly reached out and patted her back, just like my mom used to do when I was sick as a kid. I didn't know what else to do. She continued throwing up for several minutes, her face pale and sweaty. When she finally stopped, she wiped her mouth with the sleeve of her jacket and mumbled, "Sorry." I didn't think it would hit me that hard. I assumed she meant the weed. But then she added something that completely threw me off. "I've been drinking since noon," she said, laughing softly. "Didn't think I'd puke in front of you, though." It hit me then. She'd been drunk before I even got there. Everything, the flushed cheeks, the slightly slurred speech, the way she swayed a little when she stood up, it all made sense now. My heart sank. I had been so excited for this date, so ready to believe it might lead somewhere, that I hadn't picked up on any of the signs. I thought we were vibing, connecting on a real level. But now, sitting on a park bench next to a girl who could barely stay upright, I realized I didn't know her at all. She leaned against my shoulder and sighed. "You're really sweet," she murmured. "Most guys would have left by now." I didn't respond. I just kept staring at the lake, feeling a mix of disappointment and discomfort. After a few minutes of silence, I pulled out my phone and ordered her an Uber. She didn't argue. When the car pulled up, she tried to get me to ride with her. "Come on," she pleaded, grabbing my arm. "Just come back with me. We can chill more." "I can't," I said firmly. "I have to work early tomorrow." She pouted, clearly unhappy, but I stayed firm. The driver looked uncomfortable, probably unsure whether to intervene. After a brief standoff, Haley finally slumped into the back seat. As I closed the door behind her, she started crying. I watched the car pull away, my stomach churning. I walked back to my car in silence, trying to process what had just happened. I kept thinking about all the messages we'd exchanged, how genuine she seemed, how excited I was to meet her. And now, all I could think about was the smell of vomit and the realization that she hadn't come to the park to get to know me. She had come because she was already messed up and maybe just needed someone to keep her company. When I got home, I sat in my driveway for a long time. I didn't go inside right away. I just stared at the dashboard, thinking. I never heard from Haley again. I didn't block her, but she didn't reach out. Part of me wonders if she even remembered the night, or if it just blended into whatever haze she'd been living in. It hurt more than I expected. Not because I had fallen for her, of course not, but because it felt like I had been used. Not for money or favors, but for emotional cover. Like she needed someone to help her feel normal for a couple of hours, and I just happened to be the guy who answered the texts. It made me wary of dating apps after that. I didn't delete Flame right away, but I stopped checking it. I focused on work, saved my money, and eventually moved to Milwaukee. I met someone more stable years later, a teacher named Brenna, and we've been together ever since. It was late autumn in 2007, and the streets of downtown Cleveland were lined with golden leaves. The air was crisp, sharp enough to make you pull your coat a little tighter, but still pleasant enough to enjoy a night out. I had just turned 27 and was living alone for the first time in a small apartment near Ohio City. I had a decent job as a systems analyst, a small but close circle of friends, and a growing desire to meet someone special, or at least someone halfway normal. Dating apps were still relatively new back then. Tinder hadn't even been invented, but there were a few early platforms and some sketchy websites. I wasn't much of a tech guy in my personal life, but after a few nudges from coworkers, I decided to try an app called Matchmate. It was a basic swipe and chat setup, and after a few awkward exchanges that led nowhere, I matched with someone named Samantha. Samantha's profile was simple but clever. She had listed her favorite books, The Bell Jar, The Great Gatsby, her favorite food, sushi, and her dream vacation, Lisbon. Her profile picture was blurry but intriguing, a tall woman with long, wavy blonde hair, wearing sunglasses and a red scarf. She looked like the kind of person who drank black coffee and wore long coats in the rain. I was hooked almost immediately. We started chatting on a Tuesday night. Her messages were quick and witty. She joked about how difficult it was to find someone who knew the difference between your, and I laughed a little too hard at her sarcasm. She told me her name was Samantha, that she was 29 and worked in marketing. I told her my name was Eric, and that I was 27 and worked in IT. She called me a baby, and said she had a thing for younger men. I called her a cougar, and she typed back, rawr. By Thursday, she asked if I wanted to meet. I was surprised by how forward she was, but I appreciated her initiative. I asked, where and when? And she replied with a reservation, 8:30 p.m., Saturday night, at a restaurant called Veluto's in downtown Cleveland. It's already booked under your name, she said. Don't be late. That should have been the first warning sign. Who makes a reservation under the other person's name without even confirming their availability? But I was flattered and curious, so I agreed. I sent her a few more messages after that, confirming the plan and trying to chat more. She didn't reply. Not once. I chalked it up to her being busy, or maybe just playing hard to get. Saturday night came, and I found myself pacing nervously outside Veluto's. It was a dimly lit Italian place tucked between a bakery and a vintage record store. I wore a navy button-down and black slacks, trying to look casual but put together. My hands were cold, and I kept checking my phone even though I hadn't received a single message since Thursday. Inside, the hostess greeted me with a smile. Do you have a reservation? Yeah, I said. Should be under Eric. She scanned the list and nodded. Right this way. She led me to a corner table near the back. It was quiet, away from the main dining area, and dimly lit by a single hanging lamp. I sat down, ordered a drink to calm my nerves, and waited. By 8:45, I was beginning to feel the weight of embarrassment. I had been stood up before, but something about this felt worse. Maybe because I had actually been looking forward to it. I kept glancing at the door, hoping someone resembling Samantha's blurry profile photo would walk through. Then I saw her, tall, blonde, and stunning. She stepped into the restaurant alongside a waiter, her heels clicking against the tile floor. Her dress was tight-fitting, made from some silky material that shimmered slightly under the dim lights. Her hair flowed past her shoulders, and her confident stride made her look like she didn't belong in Cleveland, let alone this restaurant. I began to stand, adrenaline kicking in. But then the waiter passed by my table, and so did she. She glanced at me briefly, gave a polite smile, and kept walking. I turned in my seat, watching as she joined a table in the far corner. Sitting opposite her was a heavy-set, bald man, wearing a loud Hawaiian shirt and expensive-looking watch. She leaned in, smiling, and began to talk to him like they were old friends, or maybe something more. I slumped back into my seat and tried to make sense of what I had just seen. Was that Samantha? Had she double-booked her night? Or was I being paranoid? That's when another voice interrupted me. "Hi there. You must be Eric." I turned back toward my table and saw an older woman standing next to the waiter. She was short, maybe 5'3", with reddish ginger hair pulled back into a tight bun. Her face was heavily freckled, and she wore no makeup. Her outfit was a knitted sweater over a patterned blouse and slacks that looked like they came from a department store clearance rack. "I'm Samantha," she said, smiling. "Or, well, my name's actually Denise. But Samantha's my online name. You were right, by the way. I'm definitely a cougar tonight." She laughed at her own joke and sat down before I could respond. I felt like the floor had just dropped out from under me. She picked up the menu and said, "I hope they have lobster. I've been craving it all week." I tried to maintain composure. I told myself maybe she had a great personality. Maybe this could still be salvaged. But the truth was, I felt betrayed. She had misled me. The photos, the name, even the age, everything had been a lie. Still I stayed. Out of politeness, out of shock, and maybe out of curiosity. We ordered food, no lobster, just pasta, and tried to make conversation. She told me she worked part-time at a craft store and lived with her sister in Parma. She had been through 2 divorces and had 3 grown children. She said she used the name Samantha online because it made her feel young again. At one point, she reached across the table and touched my hand. "You're sweet, Eric," she said. "Not many men your age would give an older woman like me a chance." I didn't have the heart to correct her. The rest of the night passed in awkward silence, punctuated by her stories about her cats, her favorite TV shows, and her most recent dental surgery. I nodded along, trying to be kind, while my mind screamed at me to leave. After dinner, she asked if I wanted to grab a drink at a nearby bar. I told her I had an early meeting the next morning. She looked disappointed, but didn't argue. We walked to the valet stand, and she hugged me tightly before climbing into a cab. "You're a good guy, Eric," she said. "I hope we can do this again." I nodded, smiled, and watched her drive away. I stood on the sidewalk for a few moments, unsure of what had just happened. I wasn't angry. Not exactly. I was more bewildered than anything. I had gone out expecting a date with a woman I barely knew, and ended up sharing dinner with someone who had built an entire persona just to get that seat across from me. The experience shook me more than I expected. I didn't log back into Matchmate for weeks. When I finally did, I saw that Denise, Samantha, had unmatched me. Maybe she sensed that it hadn't gone well. Or maybe she felt guilty. Either way, I never heard from her again. I told the story to a few friends, who laughed and called it a classic catfishing tale. But for me, it was something deeper. It was a glimpse into how lonely people can be, and how far they'll go to feel seen, even if it means pretending to be someone else. When I think back to my early 20s, I sometimes reflect on how naive I was. I was living in Albany, New York, fresh out of college, working my first full-time job as a junior designer for an ad agency. Life was unpredictable and exciting, and I was eager to meet new people. This particular story is one that I don't usually tell unless someone insists on hearing the worst date I've ever had. It's long, strange, and left me with a lesson I wouldn't fully grasp until years later. It was the summer of 2003, a hot and humid time in upstate New York. I had met a woman named Tara through a mutual friend who worked in the HR department of my office. She was described as quirky but sweet, and I was told she had a cute laugh and a small dog she adored. I had just ended a short-lived relationship, so I figured why not? Our first few phone conversations were light and pleasant. She had a soothing voice and often giggled at my jokes, even the bad ones. We arranged a dinner date for the following Saturday. Tara lived in a modest apartment complex just off Lark Street, above a small cafe that smelled like roasted beans and cinnamon. I arrived around 6:30 p.m., parked my car in front of the deli next door, and walked up the steps leading to her unit. The door was already open when I got there, which was the first red flag I chose to ignore. Her apartment door stood slightly ajar, and I could hear the scuffle of tiny paws echoing through the hallway. A little brown dog, possibly a miniature pinscher or a Chihuahua mix, darted past me, its leash trailing behind like a ribbon. I instinctively bent down and scooped the little dog up, gently cradling it in my arms. Just then, Tara's voice called out from inside the apartment. "Oh, you must be my date. How are you?" She emerged from the doorway with a frazzled expression, her hair tied in a messy ponytail and her tank top slightly stained. She smiled briefly, then added, Can you take Charlie out? He hasn't had his walk yet, and I need a minute to get ready. Caught off guard, I hesitated. Was this some kind of test? A quirky icebreaker? Either way, I nodded politely and took Charlie outside. As I walked him down the street, I couldn't help but feel like I'd been cast in a role I hadn't prepared for. I was supposed to be her date, yet here I was, walking her dog before even saying hello properly. The dog, at least, was cute and well-behaved. He sniffed around, did his business near a lamppost, and wagged his tail as we made our way back to the building. Back upstairs, Tara was still scrambling around. Her hair was now brushed, but she seemed even more frantic. She thanked me for walking Charlie and quickly locked the door behind her, only to realize she had forgotten her phone and purse. She unlocked the door, dashed inside, and then locked it again after retrieving her things. We finally started walking to my car, but the entire time, she kept muttering under her breath about how chaotic her day had been. As we approached my car, she stopped abruptly and said, "You know what? I'm feeling really anxious. I don't think I can go out to dinner tonight. Can we just go to your place and chill for a bit?" I blinked. Was this really happening? I hesitated. I didn't want to be rude or dismissive, but something about this already felt off. Sure, I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. We can do that if it makes you feel better. My apartment was about 20 minutes away in the Pine Hills neighborhood. I lived with my college buddy, Drew, who was thankfully out of town visiting family that weekend. The drive was quiet, punctuated only by Tara talking about her ex-husband, her landlord, and how she was going through a transformative period. I didn't say much. I just nodded and occasionally threw in a wow, or that sounds rough. In my mind, I was replaying the events of the evening so far. I had barely said 5 words before becoming a dog walker, a listener, and now, a host. I didn't know what this woman wanted, but it didn't feel like a date anymore. Still, I was young and curious, and part of me wanted to see where this would go. Back at my place, Tara immediately made herself at home. She placed her purse on the coffee table, kicked off her sandals, and plopped down on the couch like she had done it 100 times before. She let out a long sigh, the type that sounded like she'd been holding her breath all day. I turned on the TV and asked if she wanted something to drink. She shook her head and pulled her knees up to her chest. "This week has been hell," she began, her voice cracking just slightly. "I found out my ex is getting remarried. My landlord is kicking me out because his niece needs a place to stay. And my dog is sick. I had to take him to the vet twice this week." I listened sympathetically, but deep down I felt uneasy. Her eyes were distant, and while she spoke with a sarcastic laugh, her story was anything but funny. She talked about her ex being a successful software engineer who used to pay for everything. According to her, she had sacrificed her own career to support him emotionally, and now he had moved on, leaving her with nothing. About 15 minutes into our conversation, her phone rang. Tara jumped up to answer it and walked into the hallway. Her voice became hushed and tense, and although I couldn't hear the entire conversation, bits and pieces floated into the living room. "What do you mean I need to be out by Monday?" she asked, raising her voice slightly. "I thought we agreed on the 15th. "No, I don't have anywhere else to go right now." When she returned, her expression was strained. "That was my landlord," she said. "He's being a total jerk. I might be homeless next week." She looked at me with wide eyes, and I knew what was coming next. She didn't say the words outright, but her expression said it all. "Help me. Offer to let me stay here." I didn't take the bait. I nodded empathetically, but didn't open that door. The atmosphere had shifted. I no longer felt like a guest on a date. I felt like a pawn in someone else's crisis. She continued talking, this time about how her last boyfriend had a perfect life, and how she missed the stability. The way she described him, it sounded like she had treated him as a lifeline rather than a partner. That's when I realized she might be doing the same thing to me. I decided I needed to end this. I told her my roommate would be back in half an hour and that we had plans. I also offered, falsely, to help her move and even said I'd send her some money to help her get back on her feet. It wasn't the truth, but it was the only way I could get her to leave without confrontation. She agreed reluctantly, and I guided her down the stairs, back to my car. On the drive back to her apartment, she kept talking about how hard her life had been lately and how she just needed someone who cared. I didn't say much. I was counting the minutes until I could drop her off. When we arrived outside her building, she turned to me and asked, "Do you want to come in? I could really use help packing some stuff for the move." I almost laughed out loud. I wish I could, but my roommate needs me back. He doesn't have a key, I replied quickly. She nodded, disappointed. Okay, but you'll text me, right? Of course, I lied. She got out, closed the door, and disappeared inside. I waited until she was out of sight before driving off. The moment I turned the corner, I exhaled deeply, a wave of relief washing over me. When I got home, Drew was actually there. He had come back early and was eating leftover pizza in the kitchen. I told him the whole story, from the open door to the landlord phone call to the attempted guilt trip. He stared at me in disbelief. You dodged a bullet, he said. Yeah, I replied. I think I did. I never contacted Tara again. She messaged me a few times over the next week, but I didn't respond. Eventually, the messages stopped. You ever have one of those moments where the universe decides to humiliate you in 4K HD surround sound? Yeah, that was the night my moans hit the speakers before I could even hit pause. His name was Jasper. A little nerdy, a little artsy, with a jawline sharp enough to cut glass and a mop of curls that looked like they'd never met a comb. We met on an app called Flickered, not the photo site, just similar branding for some reason, and messaged for about a week before he asked me out. He suggested drinks at a speakeasy off South Congress. I agreed because it looked Instagrammable and because he used punctuation in his texts. That's rare enough to be promising. We hit it off. He was funnier in person, which is always a good sign. He talked with his hands, had this low chuckle that made me want to lean in closer, and told me about his job designing album art for indie musicians. I told him about my chaotic roommates, my job at a startup that barely paid my rent, and how I once accidentally shaved off part of my eyebrow trying to clean it up. Somewhere between the second and third cocktail, he leaned in and said, "Want to head back to mine?" I said yes. Not because I was planning anything wild, but because I liked the way he said it. Casual, hopeful, like he couldn't believe his own luck. We Ubered back to his place, a rented house on the east side that he shared with 3 roommates. I'd been in enough shared homes to know the drill. Empty pizza boxes, faint smell of weed, and at least one mysterious stain on the couch nobody talks about. But his place surprised me. Clean, cozy, a couple of candles on the coffee table, and a soft lo-fi playlist coming from a Bluetooth speaker tucked on a shelf near the TV. He offered me water, then kissed me like he meant it. One thing led to another, and soon we were in his room, the door shut, the lights dimmed. I'm not going to get graphic, but let's just say things escalated. We were kind of tangled up in each other, and it was going well. Really well. Then it happened. Right as he was getting into the rhythm of things, right as I was thinking, wow, this is actually kind of amazing, I heard it. A voice. His voice. Coming from the living room speaker. Loud. Clear. Moaning. My brain short-circuited for a second. I blinked, confused, thinking maybe it was a neighbor's TV, or I was hallucinating. Then I realized what was happening. Jasper's phone had auto-connected to the living room Bluetooth speaker, and it was playing an audio recording of him, moaning, loudly, over and over. I froze. He froze. We both just stared at each other, horrified. Outside the bedroom door, I heard voices. Laughter. Someone gasped. Then, "Bro, is that you?" someone shouted from the living room, followed by cackling. Jasper scrambled off the bed, tripping over his jeans, grabbing his phone like it was a grenade. He frantically swiped at the screen, his face turning the color of a ripe tomato. I didn't mean, he stammered. The moaning cut off. Silence. Then even more laughter from the other side of the wall. I pulled the comforter up around me, eyes wide. "Was that you?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He nodded miserably. I record sometimes. For personal reasons. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or melt into the floor. We sat there in stunned silence for a few seconds. Then a knock on the door. "Y'all good in there?" Another roommate called out, trying, and failing not to laugh. Jasper threw a pillow at the door. "Shut up, Caleb." I couldn't help it. I started giggling. Not because it wasn't embarrassing. It absolutely was. But because it was so absurd, so spectacularly awkward that my brain just gave up. Jasper looked at me, eyes wide. "Are you mad?" "Mad?" I said. "No." "Traumatized?" "Maybe." We both laughed. The moment had already gone from romantic to ridiculous, and there was no recovering it. He offered me his hoodie, and we sat on the bed, sipping water and trying to pretend we were in a different timeline. One where his entire friend group hadn't just heard him, vocalizing. Eventually I said, "So, is this a regular habit?" He groaned. "No. I was experimenting with voice memos." I didn't think my phone would auto-connect. I forgot I used that speaker earlier today. I nodded. Well, you've got range. He buried his face in his hands. I'm never going to live this down, he mumbled. Probably not, I said, smiling. He walked me out maybe 20 minutes later. The living room had fallen quiet, but I could feel the stares from the hallway. I didn't look anyone in the eye. When I got home, I had a text waiting. I'm so sorry. Please tell me you're not going to tell everyone. I thought about it. Then I replied, only if I can use it as a cautionary tale. He sent back a skull emoji and a fair. We didn't go on a second date. Not because of the Bluetooth incident. Honestly, I kind of respected that he owned it after the fact. But because I think we both knew that something that starts with your moans on surround sound might not be built for the long haul. Still, I learned a few things that night. Always check your Bluetooth settings. Never record yourself unless you know exactly where that file is going. And no matter how bad a date gets, someone somewhere has had it worse.